We're Blake and Brittany, and we live in southern Ecuador with our 4 kids.
And if you've watched any of our other videos, you know that we are very, very happy living in Ecuador. We wouldn't want to be anywhere else.
Maybe you'd be surprised then to learn that we'd never been to Ecuador before we made this move. And that begs the question, why did we choose Ecuador?
How did we choose it?
If you watch this video, you'll find that while it was not a simple choice, we had lots of great options. It was both logical and linear. We did not have to resort to throwing a dart at a map of South America, so that's the good news.
The first thing, though, es posible ver este video en español por utilizar los subtítulos así.
In this part 1 of choosing Ecuador, we're going to share what made Ecuador stand out on paper. Since we'd never been here, we didn't have any first-hand experience to go off of, so we made our decision on what sounded good and what seemed practical.
So keep an eye out for our upcoming part 2. We're going to explain why we'd pick Ecuador today after nearly 4 years of boots on the ground. Here's a spoiler. Everything from this video still applies, but our appreciation of our new home has deepened significantly, and we'll get into that further.
I want to mention one thing before we really jump into this one, and that's visas. We don't talk too much about visas in this video because we focused our search on Latin America, which tends to be fairly generous with its visas. We could have stayed in Ecuador on several different visas, for example, but a common saying in the expat world is go where they'll take you. And if you're looking at Western nations in particular, being able to obtain a visa will obviously be a major consideration for you. So the first thing we did was choose South America.
So I'm always kind of bemused when I'm perusing an expat forum somewhere and I read that people say they're considering maybe leaving the United States for either Canada, Ireland, or Australia. So I get that English is spoken in all of those places, but they're so distinct, right? The climate, the culture, the history, the geography. So they're all kind of lumped together as English-speaking Western expat destinations. And maybe if you're desperate to move somewhere, those distinctions don't matter so much for you. But living in Europe is very different than living in North America, which is very different than living in Australia. How people spend their time, how they interact with each other and outsiders, what's important to them. So those things obviously vary country to country, but there are regional consistencies. And you'll probably find that you thrive more in some regions of the world than others.
True. Latin America, for example, is known to be laid back, right, with a tranquilo mentality. Locals are known to be very friendly. It's very easy to integrate. It's also known for being very family friendly and affordable. Well, not every person in every country is friendly, of course. Some places are more affordable and some aren't as tranquilo. But those are kind of broad strokes, of course, but they represent kind of the region as a whole fairly well.
So if you're having a hard time narrowing down a country to move to, or maybe you don't even know where to start, it can help to think about regions and see what appeals to you and consider options from there.
For us, that was super easy. We've really never even considered anywhere else other than here in South America. I mean, we glanced at Panama, which of course is Central America, also at Mexico, but we've dreamed about living down in South America for years and years and years. And that's where we started and really ended our search.
South America is still pretty overlooked, I would say, as an expat destination. And, really that baffles us because, for one, it's in the Western Hemisphere, which makes travel from the United States and from Canada pretty convenient and more affordable.
Yeah.
Western South America is in the same time zone as the Eastern or Central U.S. time zones. And if you're working for a U.S. company like we both do, or do business in North America, those kind of practical things make a really big difference in daily life.
And as we've mentioned, a lot of South American countries have diverse and obtainable visa options. So we discounted the non-Spanish speaking countries in South America. There's not very many, 4. But, simply because Brittany already spoke Spanish, right? And the countries without mountains, they weren't really appealing to us. We just have to live in the mountains. So within our chosen region of South America, we were left with Argentina, Chile, Bolivia, Peru, Ecuador, and Colombia.
I think we could have been happy in any of those countries. We've been to quite a few of them and, we love them all. And all those kind of finalist countries have areas of incredible beauty, wonderful food, fascinating history. So that was our starting point, half a dozen countries.
So really, how did we narrow it down further?
Okay, first thing is, let's talk about stability. In my opinion, you don't move anywhere in Latin America for political stability or even economic stability. Historically, those have been fleeting, tenuous states in the region. So I'll see people asking, well, what's the most stable country in Latin America? But that's not really the right question if you know much about Latin America.
And our take is that you want to go somewhere where the people persevere despite less than ideal politics, where they get on with life despite corruption and inefficiencies, things like that.
So obviously there have been throughout history and continue to be extreme cases in the region where you wouldn't want to go make a life there while that situation endured. And that's why Venezuela wasn't an option for us. But I do think it's fair to say those situations have and do exist in all parts of the world.
Yeah.
They're certainly not unique to Latin America.
No, and actually that's kind of a positive, right? Where when you live somewhere where you expect these kind of things to happen, it's not a shock to the system. It doesn't disrupt life.
You take it in stride.
Yeah, generally speaking. Obviously, there are exceptions to that. So we didn't rule out any of those 6 countries due to stability. In fact, Venezuela is the only country that we did cross off the list because of its current political and economic situation. It has been great in the past, of course.
And we hope it will be again in the future.
But Argentina has been, it suffered economically. Bolivia and Peru have had a lot of riots and protests in recent years. Ecuador has seen a big increase in gang-related violence due to the drug trade on the coast. Colombia, right, is still wrestling with its terror history, right, with the FARC rebels and things like that.
But by and large, for most people, it's life as usual in all of those countries. Sometimes a little harder, sometimes a little easier. And we kind of went into this with the understanding that as long as we didn't move to certain places in certain countries, just like in the United States, or we didn't associate with certain people, we would most likely stay out of it.
Yeah, just like you would move anywhere inside the United States, right? Like you wouldn't move to certain parts of major cities in the United States. The same thing here. And so none of that is really any different, right? And so, and also though, if things were to get worse, we were committed to building our community here, right? And being able to lean on that community in hard times, just like people have always done down here.
Worst case scenario, no matter where we ended up, we knew we would have contingency plans in place. I mean, we're not idealists, like pie in the sky, we're realists. However, there may be internal struggles, in a lot of South American countries. However, South American countries don't really have enemies. We're not worried about being dragged into an external war, which is not insignificant. And there aren't too many places in the world where you can say that.
There are times, though, when we hear fireworks go off and wonder if Peru's invading. But
we're just joking.
But yes, Brittany is correct. The very, very low risk of Ecuador going to war with any major power. But in some ways, the economic, political ups and downs are actually preferable than complete stability, like I mentioned before, because when that stability is lost in a place like the United States or some European nations, it can be lost anywhere, like I said. But what do people do?
So that's our take on the stability issue. In factoring that in, we still have 6 countries. So what's next?
It wasn't so much that we ruled out countries as much as Ecuador actually started climbing up our ranks.
One thing it had going for it was its climate. We've talked about this a lot because before we moved to Ecuador, we didn't really appreciate how much weather factors into just daily well-being. Yeah. But now, having lived with basically perfect weather almost all the time, I'm so glad that we chose equatorial living at the equator instead of moving further south, where the seasons would have been more extreme. Ecuador's year-round spring climate, well, in the mountains anyway, was a big draw for us.
There are similar pockets throughout the Andes, but being at the equator, we have a consistency that you really don't have very many places in the world. We never wear jackets, pretty much ever. But we're also rarely uncomfortably warm. We have 12 hours of daylight every single day of the year, and those things are really actually good for mental health. They contribute to this great indoor-outdoor lifestyle, right? That kind of California indoor-outdoor lifestyle that's so healthy and appealing.
So the climate of Ecuador also leads to a lot of food production. And we really liked the idea of moving to a country that can feed itself. It's something that Ecuador does very well. So many amazing things grow here. Like Ecuador's coffee and chocolate are some of the best in the world quality-wise. And we actually just learned they did a study, and cacao, which of course chocolate is made from cacao, was discovered to have been originated in Holanda, which is just, a couple hours south of us?
Yeah, not too far south of us.
So chocolate is Ecuadorian by origin, which is kind of cool. So both coffee and chocolate are highly important for quality of life, I would say.
Yeah.
And they're almost taken for granted here.
They really are taken for granted here. They don't appreciate it as much as they should. But so year-round production of fruits and vegetables, meat, seafood. We've got lots of grains like quinoa, another Andean.
Potatoes originated in the Andes as well.
Yeah. So yeah, things like that. Rice on the coast. Ancient varieties of corn and other legumes.
Corn isn't a legume.
It's not a legume, that's right. The food here is amazing and the quality is outstanding, and it's always here. It's always growing and available. So we really like what that means for Ecuador, especially when times get hard.
So Ecuador also intrigued us for other practical reasons.
It's a short flight from the US. The currency currently is the US dollar, which is really convenient. That also, it functions a little differently than you expect because it is the US dollar, but it kind of operates as its own currency. So we did not have
because apart from the US economy.
Yeah, so we didn't have any of the inflation problems that have kind of plagued the US the last couple of years.
Inflation.
Sure, maybe a little bit because of importing its foreign goods, but there was really very minimal inflation here. Lower cost of living, and it also offered us multiple visa options that would really work for our family.
So we had actually, our lifelong dream was to move to the Chilean Patagonia. Long time. But when it came time for us to move, it was during the pandemic, and Chile was closed to foreign travelers. So the decision to eliminate Chile from consideration was made for us, and I think that was a good thing because having a lot of options can be overwhelming.
And the time, like I said, we didn't appreciate yet the climate and the ability to grow food year-round, that kind of stuff that we have here in Ecuador versus Chile, where it's seasonal.
Much further south.
Much further south. But we still really look forward to visiting Chile one day. And if you've been there, what region should we go to first, of course? But let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear about it.
So even without Chile, we were left with a handful of appealing potential countries, with Ecuador kind of unexpectedly in the lead.
Yeah.
Little Ecuador.
But none of that would have mattered if we didn't want to live in Ecuador. Just because you can live somewhere doesn't mean you really should, right? But the more we learned about this little country, the more intrigued and excited we became about it.
It seemed like it would hit the sweet spot between kind of solemn Andean Peru and the more boisterous Caribbean-influenced Colombia. In fact, Ecuador was created as a buffer state between those two significant Spanish empires, and it almost continues serving that purpose.
It really does.
So we were drawn to Ecuador's gorgeous natural places and its insane biodiversity. We were very interested in its rich and evocative history.
Yeah, and we really wanted to dig in and know this place, right? We didn't just view it as an alternative to what we had in the US. We wanted to be in Ecuador for Ecuador's sake. And that's very important to consider when you're choosing a new home. Now
we've lived here for almost 4 years, and like we said earlier, all these reasons still apply why we came here to begin with. So pat ourselves on the back. Right? Yeah. We made a good choice.
And we would 100% still move to Ecuador for those reasons, but also many other reasons that we didn't even know at the time. So watch out for part 2 of choosing Ecuador to find out why we would choose Ecuador today, knowing what we do today.
So we'd love to hear how you chose your expat destination. Let us know what that process looked like for you in the comments.
If this video resonated with you, consider sharing it with a friend. And don't forget to subscribe to Average Family Abroad. Thanks for watching, and we will see you on the next one.